Okay, ready to dive deep into this whole idea of why we do things that are like totally against our own best interests. You know, those moments where you're like, why am I even doing this?
It's like we're sabotaging ourselves.
Exactly.
Ah.
And we're using Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground as our guide today.
Oh, Dostoevsky, he always gets right to the heart of the matter.
Right. So we're using this novella to explore those times when we make choices that just don't make sense. You know, the ones that leave you scratching your head and wonder, what was I thinking?
Mm.
Have you ever been there?
Oh, absolutely. Countless times.
Me too.
Yeah.
And Notes from Underground kind of gives us a framework for understanding those moments.
It's like he gives a voice to that self-destructive part of us that we usually try to ignore.
Right. It's so interesting how Dostoevsky throws out this whole idea that humans are constantly striving for happiness. Like, we're not always these perfectly rational beings seeking pleasure and avoiding pain.
Yeah, he really challenges that traditional view of human nature. And he does it through this amazing character, the Underground Man.
The Underground Man. What a character.
Right. He's this bitter, isolated guy living in 19th century St. Petersburg, and he basically makes a lifestyle out of being miserable.
It's like he's allergic to happiness.
In a way, yes. He rejects this whole idea that we should always be striving for some kind of blissful state. Instead, he emphasizes the importance of free will, even when it leads us to make choices that seem, well, kind of crazy.
It's like he's saying, screw logic, I'm going to do what I want, even if it hurts. Which, honestly, I kind of get. Sometimes we just want to feel in control, you know?
Absolutely. He believes that sometimes, even if it's illogical, even if it hurts, we act just to prove that we have agency, that we're not just robots programmed for happiness. And think about it. Haven't you ever had those moments where you knew what the smart choice was, but you just couldn't bring yourself to do it?
Oh, all the time. It's like this little voice inside whispering, do it, be reckless, prove you're not a sheep. And sometimes I just can't resist.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes the Underground Man so relatable. We all have that rebellious streak in us, that desire to break free from expectations, even if it means going against our own best interests.
Remember that time you told me about skipping that conference, even though it could have been great for your career?
Oh, gosh, yeah. I knew I should have gone. Would have been a great networking opportunity. I could have learned so much. But something in me just rebelled.
That's the Underground Man coming out in you.
Maybe. But I think it was also about being afraid. Like, what if I went and it was a total disaster? What if everyone there was super successful and I felt like a complete imposter?
Fear is definitely a big part of this whole self-sabotage thing. And the Underground Man really embodies that. He's terrified of change, of success, of actually having to take responsibility for his life. So he sticks with what he knows, even if it makes him miserable.
It's easier to stay in our comfort zone, even if it's not really that comfortable. It's like that old saying, better the devil you know. Right. And the Underground Man would much rather wallow in his misery than actually try to change things.
It's almost like he finds a perverse kind of comfort in his suffering.
Exactly. And that brings us to one of the most fascinating aspects of his character. He actually connects suffering with being truly conscious.
Wait, what? So he's saying that pain actually makes us more aware.
Yeah, it's a really interesting idea. He suggests that pain gives more weight to our experiences, that it makes us feel more alive somehow.
That's kind of a mind-blowing concept. So those times when we're really struggling, those moments that make us want to pull our hair out, those are actually the ones that make us feel most human.
That's what he's suggesting. It's like those tough experiences, even though they're painful, are the ones that really shape us. They make us question things, they make us grow, they make us who we are.
Wow, that's deep. I never thought about it that way before. But, you know, when I think about it, some of the most meaningful experiences in my life have been the ones that involved some kind of struggle or pain.
Right. It's like those challenges, those moments of adversity, they force us to dig deep and really confront who we are.
So it's not always about avoiding pain and seeking pleasure. Sometimes it's about embracing those difficult experiences because they help us grow.
Exactly. The Underground Man is arguing that maybe, just maybe, there's more to life than simply pursuing happiness and dodging discomfort. Maybe it's about facing those challenges head on and finding meaning in the struggle.
Okay, so we've talked about free will, the strange allure of suffering, and how the Underground Man is basically a master of self-sabotage. But how does all of this actually explain why we act against our own interests in the real world? I mean, this is a fictional character, right? So how does it connect to our everyday lives?
That's the million-dollar question, and I think Dostoevsky is giving us some pretty profound insights into human nature that we can all relate to. So let's unpack that a bit more.
Okay, I'm ready to unpack. Let's do it.
All right, let's start by looking at the role of pride. This guy, the underground man, is incredibly proud, almost to a fault. He would rather wallow in his misery than admit he needs help, because admitting he needs help feels like a defeat.
Oh, tell me about it. I once spent like an hour wandering around a city completely lost because I refused to ask for directions. My pride just wouldn't let me. And you know what? I was late for a super important meeting because of it.
See? It happens to the best of us, and it's so common, this need to appear self-sufficient, even when we're struggling. We'd rather suffer in silence than risk looking weak or incompetent.
It's like our ego gets in the way. We think, I should be able to handle this on my own. Asking for help is for losers.
Exactly. And that kind of thinking can lead to all sorts of self-sabotaging behaviors.
Okay, so pride is definitely a factor. But what else is going on here? Why else do we do things that seem to undermine our own well-being?
Well, let's talk about fear again. Not just the fear of looking weak, but the fear of success itself. The fear of actually achieving what we set out to do.
Wait, fear of success. That sounds kind of counterintuitive. Isn't everyone striving for success?
You'd think so, right? But sometimes success can be really scary. It brings with it more responsibility, higher expectations, and the possibility of failure on a larger scale. And for some people, that's just too much to handle.
So it's easier to stay stuck, even if we're unhappy, than to risk reaching for something more and potentially failing.
For some people, yes. And the underground man is a perfect example of this. He constantly ruins his chances for a better life, almost like he's terrified of what that might actually look like.
It's almost like he's sabotaging himself to avoid the potential disappointment or pain of actually achieving his goals.
Precisely. And I think a lot of us can relate to that on some level. Have you ever felt that pull? Like, it's easier to stay in a bad situation, maybe a job you hate or a relationship that's gone sour, than to risk the unknown, even if the unknown might be amazing.
Oh, totally. It's like this weird comfort in familiarity, even if it's not really that comfortable. We cling to what we know, even if it's not serving us, because it feels safe.
That's exactly what the underground man does. He clings to his misery because it's familiar, it's predictable, it's his comfort zone.
It's like he's afraid of stepping outside that comfort zone, even if it means missing out on something better.
Absolutely. And this brings us to another fascinating layer of his character, his internal contradictions.
Okay, contradictions. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, the underground man is full of them. He desperately wants to be respected, but he pushes people away. He longs for connection, but he can't stand being vulnerable. It's like he's at war with himself.
Wow, that sounds exhausting. To be constantly battling those conflicting desires.
It is, and it's a big part of what drives his self-destructive behavior. He wants things that are completely at odds with each other.
So how do those contradictions play into this whole self-sabotage thing? I mean, it's one thing to be conflicted internally, but how does that actually lead us to act against our own interests?
That's what we'll dig into next.
Well, think about it this way. Those internal contradictions, they're like fuel for self-sabotage. You know, he wants things that seem totally impossible to have at the same time. Like, he wants to be loved, but he also wants to be left alone. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. Like wanting to be admired, but also not wanting to be judged. It's like we want the good stuff without any of the risks or downsides.
Exactly. And let's be honest, who hasn't felt that kind of internal tug of war at some point? We all have those conflicting desires, those wants and needs that seem to pull us in opposite directions.
It's like that feeling when you want to speak up in a meeting, but you're also terrified of everyone staring at you, or wanting to go to a party, but also dreading all the small talk. It's like we're all carrying around these little underground men inside us, wrestling with those mixed feelings.
Dostoevsky would totally agree with you there. And it's not just our internal battles that can mess us up. There's also the whole influence of society, all those pressures to fit in and follow the rules and be successful. It's like there's this invisible script we're all supposed to follow. And the underground man is like, screw the script, I'm writing my own story.
Exactly. He's like this walking, talking rebellion against all those societal expectations. He's so desperate to assert his individuality, his freedom to choose, even if it means going against the grain and looking ridiculous in the process.
Like that scene where he crashes the dinner party with his former classmates, knowing he's going to make a fool of himself. It's like he's deliberately setting himself up for failure just to spite those societal expectations.
That scene is classic underground man. It's like he's saying, I'd rather fail on my own terms than succeed by your rules,
Yeah, totally. And I think there's a part of all of us that relates to that desire to be authentic to be true to ourselves, even if it means rejecting what society tells us is good or right. Have you ever felt that way? Like you had to go against the grain even if everyone thought you were crazy?
Oh, absolutely. I think we all have those moments where we have to choose between what's expected of us and what feels true to who we are. Like, think about a time when you rejected something that was supposed to be good for you, maybe a career path or a relationship that everyone else thought was perfect but just didn't feel right to you.
Oh my gosh, yes. I remember when I told my family I was quitting my corporate job to become a freelance writer.
Yeah.
They were horrified. They thought I was throwing away my future. But you know what? I was miserable in that job. And I knew I had to follow my own path, even if it seemed crazy to everyone else.
That takes courage to go against the grain like that, to choose authenticity over conformity. And I think that's what Dostoevsky is highlighting here. Sometimes acting against our own interests, at least in the conventional sense, is actually a way of being true to ourselves. It's about prioritizing those deeper needs, those yearnings for meaning and self-expression, even if it means experiencing some discomfort or even suffering along the way.
It's like there's this deeper level of self-interest that goes beyond just comfort and security, you know? It's about honoring who we are at our core, even if it means making choices that other people don't understand.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that sometimes the most fulfilling path is the one that challenges us, the one that forces us to confront our fears and embrace our complexities. It's about understanding that maybe, just maybe, there's more to life than simply playing by the rules and seeking the easiest path.
So what does all of this mean for us, the non-fictional people, navigating the real world? It's one thing to analyze a character in a book, but how do we actually apply these insights to our own lives?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I don't think Dostoevsky offers us any easy answers or step-by-step solutions. But what he does offer is a powerful framework for understanding ourselves and our motivations. He reminds us that we're not always rational beings. Our desires are messy, often contradictory, and sometimes those deeper urges lead us to make choices that seem baffling on the surface.
So instead of beating ourselves up for those seemingly bad decisions, we can try to understand what's driving them right.
Exactly. It's about shifting from a place of self-criticism to a place of curiosity and self-compassion. When we can understand the deeper needs or fears behind our actions, we can start to make different choices, ones that align with our values and our authentic selves. It's not about achieving some perfect state of rationality or always making the right decision. It's about acknowledging our complexity and learning to navigate that complexity with a little more awareness and a lot more kindness towards ourselves.
It's like embracing our inner underground man rather than trying to fight him right. It's about accepting that we're all a bit messy and contradictory and figuring out how to move forward from there.
I love that. It's about recognizing that this underground man part of us is not inherently bad or something to be ashamed of. It's just a part of our human nature. And when we can accept that, we can start to find a path that leads to both greater meaning and well-being.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
It's about embracing our humanity in all its complexity and then finding a way to live authentically, even if that means challenging conventional notions of success and happiness.
It sounds like a journey, not a destination.
Exactly. And sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the most profound discoveries. But I think that's enough for now. We've covered a lot of ground today, and it's good to let these ideas settle in before we move on.
Absolutely. Lots to ponder here. We'll be back in a moment with some final thoughts on how to take these underground insights and actually use them in our everyday lives. Stay with us. Okay, we're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground. We've been exploring this whole idea of why we sometimes act against our own best interests, even when we know better.
It's like there's a part of us that just loves to self-sabotage.
Right. And we've been using the underground man as our guide to understand this whole messy, contradictory side of human nature.
He's definitely a great example of what not to do, but he also gives us some incredible insights into the human psyche.
Totally. We've talked about free will, the strange role of suffering, the power of pride, the fear of success, and even how societal pressures can push us to make choices that undermine our own well-being.
And I think what's really striking is how much we can all relate to the underground man, even though he's such an extreme example. Those internal conflicts he grapples with, those contradictory desires, we've all been there.
Absolutely. I think everyone has those moments where they look back and think, why on earth did I do that? You know, those times when you act completely against your better judgment. And what Dostoevsky helps us see is that those seemingly irrational choices often stem from deeper motivations.
Right. It's not just about being crazy or self-destructive. There's usually something else going on beneath the surface.
Like a need for control or a fear of vulnerability, or a yearning for authenticity, or even a rebellion against all those expectations society throws at us.
Exactly. And that recognition, understanding those deeper motivations, is so crucial. It allows us to move beyond simply labeling our actions as good or bad, and instead develop a more nuanced, more compassionate understanding of ourselves.
It's like, instead of beating ourselves up for messing up, we can become curious about our own minds.
Hmm.
We start asking ourselves, okay, what was going on there? What need was I trying to meet? What was I afraid of? What was I really hoping to achieve? It's becoming our own inner therapist.
Well, exactly. And that self-awareness can be incredibly empowering. When we understand our own motivations, even the messy ones, we can start making more conscious choices in the future.
Choices that align with our values, our goals, and our true selves. It's not about becoming perfectly rational beings who always make the optimal decision.
Right. It's about embracing our complexities and learning to navigate them with a little more intention and a lot more self-compassion.
So how do we actually do that? How do we take all this knowledge from Dostoevsky and actually start making different choices in our own lives?
Yeah. Well, the first step, as we've been discussing, is awareness. Paying attention to our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. Noticing those patterns where we self-sabotage or act against our own best interests.
Okay, so notice the patterns. Then what?
And then gently asking ourselves those deeper questions. Why am I doing this? What's the fear here? What do I truly want?
It's like becoming a detective of our own minds, right?
I love that analogy. So we're like detectives, gathering clues about our own behavior. But once we've figured out the why behind those self-sabotaging behaviors, what's next?
Then it becomes about experimenting with different approaches. Maybe we need to develop healthier coping mechanisms for dealing with anxiety or fear. Maybe it's about learning to set better boundaries and actually ask for what we need. Or maybe we need to challenge those limiting beliefs that are holding us back. It's a process of trial and error, but each step we take brings us closer to understanding what truly motivates us and how we can align our actions with our deepest desires. It sounds like this is about so much more than just making better choices. It's about personal growth, about becoming more whole and integrated individuals.
Absolutely. It's about understanding that those messy, contradictory parts of ourselves are actually part of what makes us human. And instead of trying to suppress or deny those parts of ourselves, we can learn to embrace them and integrate them into a more authentic and fulfilling way of being.
It's like Dostoevsky saying, hey, we're all a little messed up, but that's okay. It's what makes us interesting. It's what makes us human.
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, those bad decisions, those moments where we act against our own interests, are actually signposts pointing us toward deeper needs or unmet desires, or even hidden strength we didn't know we had.
It's up to us to decipher those signs and choose a path that leads to greater self-awareness, authenticity, and ultimately, a life that feels true to who we are.
Beautifully said. I think that's a perfect note to end on. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep embracing the beautiful complexity of being human.
And to all our amazing listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you enjoyed exploring the depths of human nature with us. Until next time.